Hello everyone, this is Pal Ponder on Weather. In this update, we're going to be tracking Tropical Depression number 9 that's now forecast to be a major hurricane in 5 days and make landfall in Florida, along with 4 other tropical systems that we're tracking. Welcome back everyone. This is your afternoon update. I appreciate all my followers out there and my new followers. If you are new to the channel and like detailed weather breakdowns on the tropics and North America, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and notification bell to get all my daily updates to keep you ahead of the storm. So let's get right to the satellite because, man, we got a lot to cover in this update. First and foremost, we've got massive Category 4 Fiona out here making a beeline towards Atlantic Canada with devastating impacts later on tonight into tomorrow. Then we also have newly developed Tropical Depression number 10. And then our main concern right here, newly developed Tropical Depression number 9. So it depends on which one actually gets named first. We'll either take Hermine or Ian. Then we also have another system out here in the Atlantic. So things are really busy in a big way. So we got a lot to cover. So let's highlight those 4 systems. There is Category 4 Fiona, newly developed Tropical Depression number 9. Then we also have Gaston that's still out there, and then that newly developed Tropical Depression number 10. So there's actually 4 separate features out here in the Atlantic. So September is gangbusters, and man, we still got 2 more full months of tropical activity to come. So let's first now highlight Fiona, because man, this is going to be a devastating blow to Atlantic Canada. This still a Category 4 hurricane. And it's racing northeast at 35 miles an hour. So we're talking devastating impacts. They've got numerous hurricane warnings out here for Nova Scotia, back into Sydney, back in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. This could be their most significant storm in history, going to be impacting land later on tonight into tomorrow. Like I mentioned, the record is 940 millibars. It could be easily breaking that and then some. So we're talking about an historic type of event with devastating impacts and probably prolonged outages for electricity for an extended period of time. In fact, the latest European guide, it still actually has. I mean, look at these tight isobars. That gives you an indication of some really significant winds for that region. A 923, and that is on land, folks. So that is the concern. The record is 940. This would be a 923, would easily break the all-time record on land. So this would make it a historic event. So dangerous setup happening for tonight into the day to tomorrow for them. But what's concerning for the United States and the Caribbean is newly developed Tropical Depression number 9. It still has the 35-mile-per-hour winds. It does not have a low-level center, but I do feel it's going to take a name in about 12 hours or so. But right now, it's going to be traveling westbound, and it's going to be rapidly intensifying. So once Fiona gets out of the way and kind of leaves its outflow, then that will allow for this system to really start to rapidly intensify. Expected to be a tropical storm anywhere from Sunday night heading into Sunday morning, just south of Jamaica. So you should start to see possibly tropical storm watches maybe tonight or even to the day on tomorrow for Jamaica. But then this is going to be rapidly intensifying, expected to be a hurricane over the Cayman Islands, and then it should head right over Cuba and then head into the Gulf of Mexico, where it's really supposed to rapidly intensify. And now the latest update from the National Hurricane Center does in fact have it as a Category 3 making landfall somewhere around Wednesday morning in portions of South Florida. So we're going to really dive into the details here. First and foremost, we're talking about that depression going to be lifting with very heavy rainfall with flash flooding and mudslides for areas into Aruba, back into Curaçao, back into Jamaica, into the Cayman Islands in the coming days. So we could be looking at some high impact events. So we're talking about tropical storm force winds into Jamaica, more or less hurricane force winds as you go into the Cayman Islands over the next several days. And then it just gets more intense from there, where you're expecting to be hurricane force winds over Cuba. And then, wow, all bets are off, because it looks like it starts to really rapidly intensify once it crosses over Cuba and then makes a beeline towards the state of Florida, unfortunately, with devastating impacts. So let's take a look at the overall setup as far as all the models. Again, so we don't have a low-level center yet, just yet. I feel like we will have one in about 12 hours or so, but still the models, the cone of uncertainty is kind of closing in little by little as we get closer. So all the models are really trying to come together and say, hey, this is going to be literally just south of Jamaica. I still think you get tropical storm force winds there and some heavier rainfall, but it's going to go right over Cayman Islands, Grand Cayman, into the Cayman Islands in the next 72 hours with hurricane force winds, cross over Cuba as a hurricane, and then really start to get into the Gulf of Mexico by day 4 and day 5, and potentially make landfall in Florida as a major hurricane as currently with the current cone. So let's take a look at the overall wind swath on the latest European guidance. So yes, it does in fact have that hurricane or that tropical storm over portions of Jamaica here just south of there, and then having those wind field really start to expand and really start to intensify. Look at the graph here. We're talking upwards to over 100 miles per hour as it gets into the Gulf, making a beeline. This is just within the next 5 days. So a huge concern with this setup on a lot of land masses. And here's your rain aspect from this particular setup. I think the heaviest rains for Jamaica, because that's the land mass is going to hit first, would be more or less South Jamaica or south of the island, but really start taking a beating into the Grand Cayman Islands, and then really over into Cuba, and then really start to intensify once it gets into the Gulf of Mexico, and have a high impact event for Central and South Florida over the next 5 days. So once it gets to Cuba, right? So this is a preliminary 976 millibar devastating hurricane, even as that. But this is your shear aspect. So it doesn't really have that much shear to really inhibit the storm development once it crosses over Cuba. And obviously these warm waters are just extremely warm. They're untapped. We really haven't had any tropical systems really touching these waters. So this is the first one. And unfortunately, we could be looking at back-to-back major hurricanes here with Fiona and with either Hermine or Ian with this particular system. So here's the setup, because by the time we get into the middle of next week, we are going to be looking at this trough. So once this hurricane gets into the Gulf of Mexico, it should be able to get picked up by this trough, lifted across Florida, and then unfortunately could possibly scrape the eastern seaboard. A lot of model guidance is coming together. Of course, this is after day 5, so the more uncertainty will of course be beyond Florida. But for the next 5 days, we could be looking at a crossover event, and then potentially a double landfall, maybe in North Carolina or so. So there's a lot of uncertainty once we get past Florida for sure. So, but for the next 5 days, here's the setup as far as the latest EPS guidance. This is a kind of a summary over the 52 members of the European guidance. Has it as a tropical storm in the next 12 hours, right? So this continues to remain a tropical storm from 12 hours to 48 hours, but then starts to possibly go into and get a little bit of a stronger type tropical storm as we get just maybe south of Jamaica by hour 60, and then by 84 hours it could be nearing Cuba. So by the time we get into 84 hours into 96 hours, and look at the graph on the right hand corner of the screen, so it's a 972 millibar low pressure as it impacts Cuba. So there's not much land here, so I don't think it's gonna rip it apart, if any. So, but once it gets over into the Gulf, look at that time frame from 96 to 120. That's a 24 hour. So right, so we go from a 972 millibar possibly creeping all the way down to a 948, guys. That's a 24 millimeter drop within a 24-hour time span. That would actually classify it as rapid intensification, as it makes, and that's the most dangerous setup, as it's rapidly intensifying as it approaches land. So that is definitely a deep concern for Tuesday into Wednesday. So we're gonna have to be looking out for, especially as we get a low level center tonight and it gets named a storm. I think the cone of uncertainty is going to be more fine-tuned, and we could be looking at start to look at possible, evacuation settings in portions of Key West areas, if that's what it comes out to be, if this still comes to fruition with that cone of uncertainty as we get deeper into tomorrow's update. But right now, from the National Weather Service, it does in fact have a major category 3 coming into Cape Coral sometime on Wednesday morning. So there's Marco Island, there's Naples, back into Sarasota. So yeah, there's still a lot of uncertainty where exactly where this thing is going to make landfall, because we still got to go through Jamaica, we got to go through the Cayman Islands, we got to go through Cuba, and then it hits potentially Florida. So this is the latest guidance from the National Hurricane Center, and the operational guidance still complies with the overall ensemble. So we're starting to get more congruency in the model setup. So now let's talk about the GFS, because the GFS is a little bit different, right? It's just a tad bit different. I showed you all the models, but two of the biggest global models are the European and the GFS. Well, the GFS actually has it a tad bit more westbound, right? So it has it further away Jamaica. It's got a little bit further away into the Cayman Islands, and lifts it a little bit further north than what the European guidance more or less takes it into central and northern Florida. And then it could potentially cross over and hug more of the eastern seaboard. So we're talking about a lot of devastating land impacts with this system. And we'll be talking about this for many days to come. So it's not going to be expected to go into the Gulf of Mexico until about day 4 or 5. And then it could still cross over through Florida and go into the southeast coast up the eastern seaboard and days 5 through 10. So we could be literally talking about this storm for the next 7 to 10 days with a lot of land impacts in its wake. So here's the overall setup on the wind field for the latest European guidance, with that potential double landfall somewhere around South Carolina into North Carolina, maybe into day 7, 8, 9, 10 timeframes. So again, there's a lot of uncertainty. Once we get a low-level center, we'll be able to combine this track a little bit more in detail. But I'm going to be doing daily updates on this system, because this is going to be a high impact event for many days to come. And here's the overall rain going to be in its wake. So heavier rains just south of Jamaica. I think Jamaica still gets inundated with heavier rains, just especially on the south side, but really crushed in portions of the Grand Cayman, going over the Cuba here, back into Florida here with multi-inch totals. 10-inch totals is not out of the question, maybe even higher depending on the exact track of this system. And then heading up to possibly the eastern seaboard. And you can see for the rest of the United States, there's a lot of clearing. I mean, there's a cold front that's be coming down. It's be very dry front. This sucks up a lot of the energy in the atmosphere. So there's gonna, the only really big event in town would be this system coming up for this major hurricane that's got a lot of impact. So here's the latest GFS. Now this is actually interesting. On the latest operational run, it feels the trough, right? It feels the trough and actually technically has it stalling over the Gulf of Mexico. So there's still a lot of uncertainty with this particular setup until we have that center going to be taking shape, and I think that will come to fruition sometime tomorrow morning. And so obviously the further north would put the heavier rains a little bit further north as well, and more or less into central and northern Florida. And then once it crosses over, it would definitely put more and more land impacts into play around the eastern seaboard and much of the East Coast here. So there's a lot to talk about in the days ahead with this system. So I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video, definitely leave your comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel to catch the latest update, where I protect you before and after the storm.